much with the protesters. These young men are incredibly angry. Everything happening.
They taking him. You. Straight up.
Yeah, that's the scene 2 days ago, actually, in Baltimore, but it hasn't gotten any better as protests continue in the streets over the story of a man who died in police custody. His name is Freddie Gray. And once again, to remind you, his attorney will join us at 8:35. Joining us right now, though, Rod Wheeler, former D.C. homicide detective. And, Rod, gosh, I hate having you back on these stories. It's becoming way too much of a trend. But what do you know on this one, and whether it's fair to compare this story to the Michael Brown incident in Ferguson, for example?
Well, I think what's important, first of all, good morning, guys, but I think what's important is that the listeners understand that the police did, in fact, have a legal reason to chase Mr. Gray. I mean, when you look at the circumstances surrounding the fact that they were pursuing him, they had the right to pursue him. And then when they did catch up with Mr. Gray, you don't see, which is different here. Now, you don't see them beat this guy. You don't see them do anything, wrong to him, so to speak. He fell to the ground, and then they made the arrest. Now, I think this is so important, I think what we need to do, though, is wait until the final autopsy report comes out before people jump to conclusions and start saying that the police did something wrong in terms of beating Mr. Gray.
Well, in fact, I'm glad you raised that, because I've been talking to some people who work in emergency rooms, for example, who say, look, we have had cases. We've seen this happen where somebody comes in and they have sustained a neck injury, but they're still walking around, they're still talking, and then all of a sudden they turn their head a certain way and they fall over because there was some kind of problem with one of their vertebrae that sliced the cords in the back of the back. I mean, these kind of things do happen.
They do happen, Brian, and I've seen them firsthand myself. And that's why I said it's so important that we wait until we see the autopsy report. But having said that, I do understand the frustration of many in the African-American community, being African-American myself, but I don't think we need to always jump to the conclusion every time we see a situation happen like this that it was race-related. First of all, let's face the fact that the guy wasn't out there reading a Bible or on his way to Bible study. The guy was out there selling drugs. And that's why he has a history of selling drugs. He has a criminal record. He's been arrested 4 to 5 times for selling heroin. So, we want the police in our communities to police the communities and to clean up the communities. So when they do make an arrest, we can't just clobber the cops every time because somebody is injured as a result of the arrest.
Can you tell me a little bit about Baltimore in particular? I mean, I know, being a D.C. homicide detective, I know that you have a pretty good experience with our neighbors to the north there. It hasn't been a great place for police and community relations, and it also hasn't been a great place with regard to crime. Tell me about the unique circumstances there.
No, Baltimore has had a history of major crime issues. Very familiar with Baltimore. I spent a lot of time down in Baltimore working with a lot of the business community there and protection and things like that. But heroin it's running rampant in Baltimore. It always has. There's reasons for that, and we can get into that one day, but there's reasons for that. Drugs are just everywhere on the street, and I think a lot of it is not just the crime. I think a lot of it is the social aspect of things down there. Unemployment is high. Education levels is low. So, you have to look at the totality of everything, which causes these types of issues.
Yeah, I mean, I'm among those who say, look, if the police did something wrong here, then the full power of the law, I mean, the hammer of Thor should come down on top of them. But we initially thought that about Ferguson, didn't we?
We did, and even with Ferguson, and I know everybody still has their feelings about what happened. You have to go back to the beginning and say to yourself, did the police have the legal right to even approach or talk to these individuals? And in both cases, whether or not, they should have used force or not, in both cases, this case and that case in Ferguson, the police did, in fact, have the legal right to make these stops. I would have done the same thing, so it has nothing to do with race. Now, do we have issues with race? Like I said earlier, yes, we do. Yeah. But this case had nothing to do with race. But, I want to go back real quick. When you look at the video, and I think a lot of the listeners saw the video of Mr. Gray being dragged, he didn't have much power or use of his legs when he was being dragged. And that's an indication, Brian, that maybe there was already damage to his vertebrae when he fell. That is an indication of that. So let's be fair before we start clobbering the cops again. Say, oh, they must have beat the guy. Well, no, let's wait, like I said, see the autopsy report and come to a reasonable conclusion.
Do you think the autopsy report can give us that definitive answer?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think the autopsy report is the Bible when it comes to cases like this. You know what else, real quickly, the autopsy report will show is other injuries that this guy sustained to his body. So if he was beaten or something like that, like some people are saying, we'll clearly see that on the autopsy report.
As a former cop, there's another thing that I'd love for you to comment on, and that is that I believe every single one of, or all of them except for one of the police officers involved in this apprehension of Mr. Gray, all of them waived their rights, and they all spoke immediately to investigators about this situation. Is that normal, and what does that tell you?
Well, no, it's not normal. I like the fact that they did speak, but I'll tell you, as a person that was in the police union for many years, we would tell officers, don't say a word.
Right.
Because their words will be twisted, and somebody's going to run with them. But in this case, they did speak up. And it seems to me like they came across because they wanted to talk, because they wanted to be honest about what happened. So it's not normal, but they did speak up, and they sound believable to me. So again, I just wish the community would just wait. Let's have a thorough investigation, and then let's reach a reasonable conclusion.
Can you maybe, based on what we see in the video and based on how the arrest has been described, because not the entire incident is not shown on video,
right.
When the police say that they used no force, and that's the quote, there was no force used while arresting Mr. Gray, how does that mesh with what we see and what we know to be true with regard to the fact that he ended up dead?
Well, again, it goes back to when did he sustain his injury to his spine? And I think, obviously, what caused the death was the injury to the spine, but when did that happen? And did that happen as a result of external infliction to his body, being beaten and things like that? I don't think so. Again, I haven't seen the autopsy report, but when you look at the video, guys, and I can tell you, I've been out there on the street many, many years, I don't see the aggressiveness used by the police in making the arrest.
But
yes, they had to drag him to the car because he didn't want to go, so they did have to drag him to the car, but you don't see them kicking, you don't see them striking, you don't see any of those kinds of things.
And that's what I need to understand, and this will be something that Freddie Gray's attorney will be bringing up at 8:35. How can you say there's no force when you were dragging him, or is that not considered force?
Well, that's not really considered force. He didn't want to get into the police vehicle, first of all. Let's be clear about that.
Yeah.
Mr. Gray did not want to. That's why he ran in the first place. So they had to use some degree of power, if you will, to put him into the police vehicle because he didn't want to go. But that's not necessarily considered, actual force.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you. Always so good to have you, Rod Wheeler.
Really a pleasure. Thanks, Rod.
Okay, guys. Have a good day.
Someday we're going to have you on just to talk about football or something.
Exactly,
because it's always,
exactly.
man.
I know. All right, guys. See you later.